This is my audience.
Should have left that on.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Clinton III. Today I'm going to be presenting a speech to you all about the prison industrial complex, just kind of giving you a little bit of information about it. So the United States is home to 5% of the world's population. Despite that, the U.S. is also home to 25% of the world's prison population. So you might be kind of wondering how that might be possible. And so in large part, the answer to that is going to be the prison industrial complex. And so that's the term that was coined by an abolitionist group called Critical Resistance, and they define the prison industrial complex as overlapping interests of government and industry. They use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as means to create solutions to economic, social, and political issues. So you might also be wondering, how could such an institution exist? And so to answer that, we're going to have to kind of go back. And so that starts January 1st, 1863, and that's going to be the enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so this is widely known as what freed the slaves. In reality, it just more so laid the legal framework to denounce slavery as a legal practice, which will kind of help to hurt the Confederacy and kind of get them to join back into the United States as a whole. If you fast forward 2 years later, that will be the ratification of the 13th Amendment. And that's what kind of created a loophole for the Southerners, who were formerly the Confederacy, to kind of continue practicing slavery in a way that wasn't necessarily slavery itself. So the 13th Amendment says that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude will be legal except as punishment for a crime, whereas the individual has been duly convicted. So essentially it's stating that slavery was completely illegal unless it was deemed to be punishment for a crime where someone has kind of been convicted of that crime. However, in large part, it was kind of hard for a lot of individuals to have a due conviction due to a lack of literacy, especially legal literacy. As of the 1860 census, the United States had a population of around 31.9 million. 3.9 million of this was around 3.9 million of this were enslaved individuals. And so, being that they had this newfound freedom, a lot of them weren't native to this land, so they didn't really have anywhere to go. That's when you see the first prison boom of the United States. A lot of these individuals were arrested in mass for charges such as vagrancy and loitering, essentially meaning being in places where they deem you not to belong. By the year 1885, there were over 138 prisons, which housed nearly 53,000 inmates. And if you were to give the goods that they produced at modern value, it would be around $741 million. A lot of these people worked up to 15 hours a day, and so it kind of replaced what slavery was. It was a means of free labor that they could direct toward cash crops, things like that, such as tobacco, and kind of get that labor and that production that they were needing. If you fast forward nearly 100 years later, the prison population remained kind of steady. You do kind of see gradual increases as you go through different eras, such as the industrial era, things like that. As of the year 1970, the prison population was around 196,000. Around this time, there was a big interest in criminal reform due to certain presidential campaigns, such as that of President Nixon. One thing that he kind of focused on was, criminal reform, the war on drugs, things like that. And so there was actually a psychologist by the name of Philip Zimbardo who kind of wondered exactly how efficient and how ethical kind of these institutions were. And so he was given a grant by the U.S. Office of Naval Research, and with that grant, he performed what was called the Stanford Prison Experiment. And so what that was is he turned the basement of Stanford University into a pseudo prison, essentially meaning a fake prison. And so with that, he took 24 individuals who he deemed to be psychologically fit men, split them in half. So half would act as the prisoners, half would act as the guards. Zimbardo himself would act as the prison superintendent, and he would kind of help to mediate the interactions between the two groups. The experiment was designed to last around 2 weeks for his data collection. However, it was cut short after just 6 days. A large part of the reason why it was cut short was because of the psychological strain that all the participants began to show. In fact, from his research and his findings, he actually coined the term the Lucifer effect. And so what that kind of was it was the psychological effect of just coming into so much of power and understanding that there was nothing really to stand in the way of what you felt like you could or could not do. Zimbardo himself even began to show signs of abusing the power that he had given himself through the experiment. And so through the publishment of his findings, you would kind of think that we would maybe take another look at what our prison reform was and how our justice system was kind of structured. However, this wasn't the case, unfortunately. As you can see here on the graph, after the year 1970, that's when things kind of began to, expand more exponentially, in fact. And you might be wondering why. So a large part of that is going to be the war on drugs. Around 8 years after the Stanford Prison Experiment was performed, the prison population had grown from 196,000 to 357,000. That was a rate of around 161 people per 100,000. By the year 1985, the figure had grown to nearly 500,000 at 480,000. This caused criminal reform to take a turn for the worse. A year prior to that last figure I gave you, 1985, in the year 1984, you see the dawn of private prisons. And so the first private prison was called CoreCivic, and that was opened in Nashville, Tennessee. And so they kind of had like a financial structure as they were given government money. And so the more inmates that they had and the more beds that they had in the facility, the more money that they would receive from the government, essentially monetizing criminal justice and giving a framework for even more of a profit to be made off of such facilities. Mm-hmm. Today, there are over 130 of these kinds of facilities. The original CoreCivic has actually been closed down because that's been kind of a center for a lot of political activism as far as criminal reform and things of that nature. So this facility that you see here is actually closed down, but there's still 130 more that are just like it. And in fact, this industry itself is responsible for over $5 billion of the U.S. economy. Mm. That's $5 billion that has been made off of criminal reform. So all in all, the prison industrial complex is a large kind of thorn in the side of what our criminal justice system is supposed to be. And it's definitely something that I feel we should, kind of take a look at. It's something that I actually have a bit of investment in. At my previous college, Howard University, I actually took part in a seminar with individuals who were incarcerated and also with a large group of activists who were kind of working to, reform the systems and things that we have in place for those individuals. So I hope I was able to, inform you guys a little bit more about the prison industrial complex and maybe even inspire you to do some independent research of your own. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now you can breathe.